The challenges and rewards of caring for an older family member. Next on AgeWise. Hello, I'm Ed Rosenberg and welcome to AgeWise. A previous show focused on informal elder care. Why did we do that? Well, for starters, people are living longer. Life expectancy is increasing. In addition, the baby boom generation is entering old age. These two factors combine to produce an explosion in the number of older people. The 85 and over age group, the oldest old, is growing particularly quickly, and this is the age group that requires the most care. In addition, the economic recession has forced federal and state governments to cut back on supports for formal programs such as Meals on Wheels or home health. What that means is that more elder care devolves onto the family. Rosalind Carter, wife of former President Jimmy Carter, summarizes best and most succinctly. She said, "There are four kinds of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers." Elder care can be very stressful physically, psycho-emotionally, economically, socially, even spiritually, and it can affect our relations with our family members. So yes, this is an important issue. Today's guests have both personal and professional experience with family elder care. Bunny Burke Eilers works with the High Country Caregiver Foundation and has extensive experience caring for aging family members. Brenda Reese is Family Caregiver Support Specialist for the High Country Area Agency on Aging and founder and director of the High Country Caregiver Foundation. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Previously, when you were on the show talking about elder care, the focus was a little more macro level. We talked about elder care as a national phenomenon, aging population, more family-based elder care. And today we're going to flip the focus to a more micro level and focus on one person's story about elder care, what to expect, how to prepare for it, how to do this effectively while maintaining our health and our sanity. Because Bunny, you seem to be a good example of someone who's managed to do this. So let's start by having you recap what your elder care experiences have been.
Well, my first one was actually as a very young woman. I had graduated from nursing school, and within that next year, my grandmother was diagnosed with breast cancer. And being the only nurse in the family, it was decided that I would take the leave of absence and go live with her. And so I did. That was more medical than it was geriatric or dementia. I was privileged to be able to spend that time with my grandmother, but it was taxing being fresh out of nursing school. And then decades later, my second bedside nursing walk down that long road was with my father. And he had lung cancer. That was a 2-year commitment to him that I'm glad I did. 7 years later, my mother was diagnosed with dementia, Alzheimer's. And that was almost 3 years of 24/7 care in her home and mine. And then 2 years after my mother died with complications of Alzheimer's, my husband was diagnosed. So now I am on that fourth journey with a loved one.
So if there were stripes to be earned for elder care, you've certainly earned your stripes. Let's talk about some of the ways that elder care can affect people, some of the ways that these stressors can manifest themselves, perhaps physically or emotionally. Did you go through any of these?
Oh, I did. Physically, it's very taxing. I was able to meet and am able to meet the physical and medical needs of my loved ones more easily than the situation in Alzheimer's and dementia, when you have a role reversal, when you have to be creative, try to keep a sense of humor. But as Brenda has said before, it's the hardest job you'll ever do, is being a caregiver. And you've been one twice?
I have.
Yeah.
I have, and by far the hardest job. And it's something that, as a rule, we don't receive training for. We just find ourselves in that position.
And that's why caregivers need as many supports as they can get, whether they're formal or informal. In a previous conversation, you mentioned there's a difference between preparing for caregiving and delivering caregiving. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
In the preparation, I wasn't prepared for my mother's dementia. I mean, we knew it was coming. We saw the early signs. But I think, as in all cases, I was in denial, and so many family members are. It's something you don't want to acknowledge. It's kind of frightening to think it's coming your way to deal with. But as soon as she was diagnosed, I felt confident that I would do it and do it well, being a nurse and a psychiatric nurse. At the same time, I had some anxiety, so I said, well, I'm going to learn everything I can and get current on what's available, information's available, services available. First thing I did was call the local chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. And they have chapters and offices in most towns, most large towns, every city. I got involved with them. They invited me in. They had a 1-hour session with me. Huge book of resource materials. They explained to me the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia. And that's the first thing to learn, because many people have access to the Alzheimer's Association benefits other than people who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, because dementia is the umbrella term that covers the memory loss that comes from head injuries, from stroke. You know, football players have head injuries, from strokes, either a cerebral hemorrhage or a blood clot. It can be with Alzheimer's, where you have the little plaquey matter on top of the brain. So it can come from several different causes, but the overall term is dementia. It's memory loss, it's the signs, the symptoms, and the things you have to deal with.
And certainly the Alzheimer's Association is a wonderful resource. Their website is www.alz.org. Brenda, do you find that a lot of people who come to you as a family caregiver support specialist or as director of the Caregiver Foundation have a similar kind of story? I didn't want to acknowledge that this was happening to my loved one and I was going to find myself in this role?
Quite frequently. They start noticing little things, but I always say, if you don't acknowledge it, you don't have to address it. So a lot of people, whether it's conscious or subconsciously, they just say, oh, Mom's just getting forgetful or whatnot. Bunny's the exception in that she sought out resources. Most people wait until they're totally overwhelmed, right in the midst of it. They don't have a clue where to turn. That's most of the phone calls I get.
And as we saw in the opening quote from Rosalind Carter, we can be pretty sure that this is going to affect us one way or another. Yes. So there's not much point in engaging in a lot of denial, since even as the Boy Scouts say, be prepared. You know, it's better to prepare for these kinds of things. Bunny, what other kinds of surprises might there have been? I mean, did you realize you'd have to supervise medical care as much? Did you understand what was going to happen to your social life, how your friends might react? Were there issues with other family members in terms of the best course to take?
Well, I was prepared more for the medical. I felt confident that, still am. But it's all the other issues, like you mentioned, with the social issues. I wasn't prepared for the change in friendships. And it's not because they love me less or love my husband less. It's their degree of being uncomfortable. It's way out of the comfort zone. And so in the early stages, they're with you and they're trying to maintain that social relationship. Then I find that friends who would stay 4 or 5 nights at my house here in the mountains now stay one night and then want to have a honeymoon night in a hotel. You know, they don't know what to do with someone who is so diminished and can't talk about the things they once talked about. And with the dementia and Alzheimer's comes a lot of physical issues like balance and falling. Well, he's no longer able to do the things we all used to do together. But I think conversation with someone with dementia and Alzheimer's is the limiting factor on relationships because people just don't know what to do. The best they might have was a few minutes in a nursing home visiting a grandmother at some point. But to sustain a conversation with someone is difficult. So those relationships have changed.
So we need to learn how to interact with people with dementia, with Alzheimer's. Brenda, in the training that you do, what do people need to know so that they can maintain friendships with people who are caring for someone with Alzheimer's, so that they know, do I mention this or not? How do I react? What do they need to know?
I think the most important thing for people to know is, and it depends on the level of dementia, if it's early on or at the latter stages, but I try to approach people at where they're at. What I don't like to see is when people treat seniors with dementia like children, and I think it lessens their dignity. So I always suggest meet them where they're at. If they're able to carry on, they may repeat the same thing over and over again. Just smile and say, is that so? Give them the opportunity to feel like they're contributing. I think that's what we tend not to do, is put them in a corner and exclude people with dementia like they can no longer interact, and that's not always the case.
It seems to me that if we're in a caregiving role, we probably need friends more than we ever did before. Bunny, did you pick up tips on what to tell your friends about what's going on and how they could feel and how they can behave?
Pretty basically, tracking along with what Brenda said. I mean, that's the accepted advice, and it's good advice. One of the things I found in my own family with my husband is he complains that when other people around, they tend to talk to me and to not him. So I've had to share that information with the family, with the children and friends. When you come to visit, I'm going to step out of the room so you can talk to Tom. It always goes back to they're uncomfortable, they just don't know how to interact, how to sustain a conversation with him.
Well, what kinds of things can they talk about where the interaction can be maintained?
Oh, I see you're reading your Bible. What person are you reading about? Oh, I like that shirt you've got on. Is that your favorite? Oh, I see you have some DVDs out. Which one is your favorite? What do you like to watch? It's in the moment, because as you progress through dementia, the recent memories that they've accumulated are slipping through the cracks. There are days when my husband does not remember the names of his grandchildren or a particular child, although we'll look through the photo album and see their pictures all day long. He could not remember that child's name, but he can tell me the name of every guy in his college fraternity, every pilot in his Air Force jet fighter pilot squadron, but can't remember his children's name.
So it can be good to talk about the past,
right?
Because those memories stick with people. One thing that intrigues me is the spiritual component, not just of aging, but of elder care. Faith, spirituality is very important to a lot of older people and to their families. But I can see that especially if you're involved in what we could call serial elder care, which is your experience, it can test one's faith. How did you deal with that?
I think I've come to the point, well, I know I have come to the point in life where you're evaluating, or I'm evaluating, there's got to be some purpose to my life. why am I here and what am I supposed to learn? And I think what I am supposed to be learning is patience, more compassion, and selfless. Patience is the big one, because I think it tries your patience more than it tries your faith. We all know that there's no easy way to get out of this world. And so I think our role as caregivers is to help that person on that last journey ease out of this world into the next one. Make it quality time as the best you can. Help them maintain their dignity. Like Brenda said, that's one of the ongoing issues. Spirituality for those, especially for Tom and my mother, they got deeper into it. I picked Tom up from Bible study the other morning, and we're in the car, and I said, well, who are you all studying about today? Who'd you talk about? He says, oh, we're in Genesis. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, yeah, in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. And I knew he was going to do the 7 days of creation. Well, he got that one. Then he goes on to day 2 and the oceans, and day 3 and 4. By the 4th, he was disintegrating, and I knew he wasn't going to make it to 7. So he started, and he was getting real frustrated. And you got to read body language and facial expressions, eye expressions, and I could see, I was driving, but peripheral, I could see he was getting tensed up. And I went, this is not going well. So as he struggled, I went, I know, on the 7th day, God went to Jamaica. And his head whipped around. He went, what? I said, well, God made the world. He made Jamaica. It's a good place to rest on the 7th day. Then he laughed, and it broke the tension. He said, it's not nice to make fun of God. I said, I'm not making fun of God. He made Jamaica. Why couldn't he go there? So then he laughed, and you gotta be flexible and bring some humor into it for their sake as well as your own.
Certainly with elder care, especially for people with some type of dementia, flexibility is a key. If people get frustrated because they're focusing on something and they can't quite get there, they'll end up getting angry and perhaps acting out. So finding ways to diffuse, distract, deflect can be very effective, and in this case, you used humor that way. Brenda, when you do your work, do you involve the church, someone's pastor, someone's priest? What's their role in the caregiving scenario?
It's funny you should ask. Actually, I've met in the last 2 weeks with 2 separate faith-based communities where we're going to be moving our group respite program to them. But it depends on their interest and what they express to me, how important that is to them. What I can say about caregivers, if I had one piece of advice to give to any caregiver, is that you have to recognize when you need help, and you have to be willing to ask for it. Mm-hmm. People often don't know what is going to help you. They're afraid they're going to be more of a hindrance. It's real important for you to identify what it is you need. I always say, people often at church, call me if you need something, but we are reluctant to call on them. And I often say, you're really depriving them of that good feeling that we all get when we do something to help someone else. So I'm like, let them help. And secondly, they're more apt to ask you to help them if they find themselves in a position. They don't feel as awkward asking you. So that's the biggest piece of advice I could give to any caregiver, is ask for help. People are out there to help, but unless you ask for it, they're often afraid, don't want to impose, or for whatever reason. So
it's an excellent strategy to turn that around. So if I'm a caregiver, instead of thinking that asking for help is a sign of my inadequacy, instead I need to think other people really want to help, and they will feel better if they do that. Oh, and by the way, it'll make things easier for me.
Yeah, I really think so. I think even if it's just picking up a gallon of milk when they run to town, little things like that, because anybody that's been a caregiver specifically with someone with dementia, it's a chore getting out and going to the grocery store or just running to get something. So let your friends and neighbors and church family help if they offer.
Bunny, you talked before about how the caregiving, how the situations affected your friendships or your friends' perspectives and behaviors. Let's talk about family members too, because caring for someone with dementia, any kind of elder care can bring issues, perhaps family issues, family dynamics issues to the surface that had been submerged for years. Are there siblings or children, uncles and aunts that you had to deal with in the caregiving experiences where maybe not everybody agreed on everything?
I've seen that a lot, and where I saw it most was in the Alzheimer's support groups. And like I said before, you don't have to have a family member with Alzheimer's. It's any kind of dementia that they're helped with. And in the Alzheimer's support group, the main theme I heard in every one, and I joined 5. There was one a day. I went every day of the week until I got what I thought was a good foundation. The one issue was power of attorney. And every group I was in, a part of every meeting was somebody was having an issue with siblings with power of attorney. And that would be one of the first things that I would advise people, children of older parents, spouses, to deal with early, because it becomes a thorny issue. I'm an only child. So it was a one-man show with my parents. I didn't have anyone else to deal with. With my husband, we have 4 children. And I am blessed that all 4 of them are very engaged with their dad. They're very sensitive and wanting to be helpful with me, to give me relief time. They visit. I've had to educate them on an ongoing basis of, when you come see your dad this time, he can do this, he can't do that. They've been in denial, and that's one of the issues with children, is your children don't want to acknowledge that the strongest people in their life, their parents, are being diminished and becoming helpless. And so at different times I've had to deal with different children who were in denial. Now I think we're all on the same page. And sometimes you get the brunt of anger. If you're trying to say something negative, or it's truthful but it's negative about their condition, then you get criticism. You're just trying to diagnose. Well, as it turns out, it is what it is. So in the early years, or in the early months and weeks, I think all caregivers try this. They try to rescue their person, and there comes a point where you realize not everything can be fixed. You can't rescue, and you've got to step away and let that person be who they're becoming. And that's hard for all of us, spouse, children as well, dealing with it. But I've been blessed with good 4 kids that are very active and very helpful.
Yeah, it seems you're very fortunate. I mean, it's important for the family to have what we call the conversation, and periodically to revisit that conversation. You also mentioned the importance of taking care of legal documents, various powers of attorney, being sure there's a will, and so on. And these are things that people should avail themselves of. Brenda, how do people go about accessing the various resources that are available to them?
They can call me at our office, or go on our website, which is being reconstructed, but it will have links to other resources both locally and nationally. They can go to our website once it's completed, as well as the Area Agencies on Aging's websites being updated as well. Going back to what Bunny said, I'm so sorry. What Bunny said was, I don't know if she was fortunate or unfortunate being the only caregiver and not having siblings. I see those stories where it is quite differently, where one child doesn't agree, and then particularly with life support and those issues, if it's not discussed ahead of time, it can be disastrous. I've seen families that have never spoke to each other again because of decisions that were made.
It can be a two-sided coin. If you're an only child, you don't have to deal with siblings. On the other hand, you don't have siblings to support you as well. Bunny, if there were one sort of most important thing that you would tell prospective caregivers, you need to be prepared for this, and if there were one biggest mistake that you feel you might have made? What would those be?
Advice to caregivers is, like you said, assume you're going to be in this loop in one of those 4 categories, and so start getting educated now. Once you get involved with an organization like Brenda's and the foundation or your local senior center, they network and they will spin you off into the legal experts.
So there are resources.
There are resources.
What mistakes should I avoid?
Thinking you're not going to make other people's mistakes. One of the first Alzheimer's Association or the support groups I went to, I remember a woman saying to the leader, well, you remember about that day in the laundry room, and she was all covered up with guilt. You could see it. Well, that was my first visit. I wasn't in on the inside story, but I guessed that she'd probably gotten short with her husband in the laundry room.
So we'll make mistakes, and that's okay because we're human. Right?
We're human, and that's what I
Okay.
learned.
I want to thank you both so much for coming on the show today, especially Bunny sharing your personal experiences, Brenda amplifying that professionally. There are some good resources, the Alzheimer's disease website, www.alz.org, the AARP website, aarp.org. Also, a very good book that a lot of people like, How to Care for Aging Parents. It's less than $20. It's the Bible of elder care. So I recommend that you think about that. That's AgeWise for this week. If you have questions or comments, you can reach us through our website, www.watchapptv.com. I'm Ed Rosenberg. Age wisely and age well, and thanks for watching.